Do you go to the gym because you don't want to be a loser? But then you're stuck with bad gun carrying options. Like a loser? What is this? A gun girdle? A waist purse? And don't even get me started with the stupidly slow draw times. There must be another way. And now there is with Arrowhead Tactical Apparel. Yeah! Introducing the way to carry in gym shorts with your regular concealed carry setup. From small guns to full-size guns, the internal belt allows you to wear athletic clothing for an athletic gun. With Arrowhead Tactical Apparel, you could do all the athletic things that you couldn't comfortably do before, like tie your shoes, run with the dogs, rescue an idiot from the bottom of a well, assist your peers through personal development, and much more. This is perfect for anyone who likes wearing athletic clothes who knows how annoying and unsafe it is to carry with an elastic waistband. And guess what? There's
options.
There's shorts. And if you're weird and don't like shorts, there's joggers. Or joggers, but more. You can even get yourself set up with something sweet like a hoodie or a shirt. They even make their own holsters. There's lots of styles to choose from, with options for both men and women, so everyone can be comfortably prepared.
But wait, there's more!
Use code REGULARGUY to save on anything in their store. I hear they do some cool sales every once in a while too. Remember to tell them I sent you, because if you want to dress and carry comfy too, Arrowhead Tactical Apparel is for you. So today we're going to talk about an optic that I personally view to be severely misunderstood, and this is for a couple of reasons, honestly. The first one is the simple fact that, man, just good lord, if you start looking through YouTube videos that are on this, just across the board, and you can go back over 10 years, there's just a whole lot that is spoken on these optics that have very little understanding over why things are the way that they are. And the other half of it is just guys that just don't shoot a lot, that have that little understanding, that'll just sit there and look at the optic, press a couple of buttons, go over some features that they figured out themselves, because let's just face it, none of these people actually read an instruction manual in their lives, continue to not understand what the optic is made for, comment on the low battery life, and comment on the fact that the reticle is fuzzy, pad out the runtime to the video to 10 minutes so they can fully monetize it and then call it good. So today we are going to address that, well, the optic itself and why things are the way that they are. In addition to the fact that we're going to sit there and talk about a lot of the minutia that you can dig into and why this is quite possibly the best offensive reticle that has ever been put into an optic with the feature set that it has, probably on planet Earth. I can't address modern EOTECH, especially the EXPS3, without talking about a little bit of previous EOTECH problems. Now, up until 2012, you had a series of issues that these optics ran into, and these all really have to do with a central thing, and that's the laser emitter that is inside of the optic that's shooting itself into a diffuser, rather than an optic that uses an LED as its method for projecting a reticle on screen. Now, this requires significantly more power than LED-related anything, to such a point where there's a lot of optics, even back then, that would have battery life measured in years, plural, versus an optic that at its best would get you 600 hours, maybe 800 if it spent way more time not being used than being used. And in addition to this, you have significantly more annoying issues. For instance, the older battery covers that were straight in line with the receiver would start running into contact issues, leading to reticle flickering problems. In addition to that, lens delamination issues. And then you would have invasive moisture issues, where much like a lot of handgun closed emitter optics today, you would have moisture getting inside of the optic body in which you can't do anything about it, and after a certain point makes the optic basically useless. And then you had enormous drift issues from guys that would be in, frankly, some of the most inhospitable working environments for these objects on planet Earth. You know, places like Afghanistan, where you could be in the lowlands for half the day, where it's very warm, and then climb up into the mountains where it is suddenly much, much, much cooler. Possibly extremely cold in certain cases, where you would have really large drifting issues in which, most optics run into drift problems. In fact, all of them do. But then you look at these in particular and it's like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And this would force a lot of people at L3 to go back to the drawing board and really just kind of figure out what's actually going to work with this optic, or even if we should proceed with the design in general, really. So the result of all this is the extreme line of EOTECH, and that would be the EXPS line of optics, the most modern of which being the EXPS3, but these E versions of this would come out around about 2012, which is around about when knowledge of these problems for the most part would hit the general public, and that's when we started talking about the drift issues with EOTECHs for a few years. So let's just be straight here. By the time the EXPS models came out, these issues are basically solved, and by the EXPS3, all the little quality of life improvements are there, so if there's an optic to get in the EOTECH line, the EXPS3 is like the one, unless you're a guy in the Coast Guard that's in the Hitron program that's sitting there trying to knock out boat engines with 50s, in which case there's a reticle for that too. So now that we've arrived here, let's go ahead and actually talk about the optics themselves in their modern iterations that have essentially been over these issues for long periods of time. Let's talk about why you would use them, where you would use them, and where they're the most effective. First things first, let's just talk about the things that I have a tendency to gravitate to. All of the feature set in the world is great if your turrets are inaccurate, and if your parallax is trash, you don't have an optic that's useful in the first place. Now, first of all, the turrets themselves are mathematically accurate, although on occasion, especially with really used optics, especially in really unforgiving environments, they have a tendency to squish, so you really gotta listen for the clickovers. But still, the math is there, the math works, and it is solid in that regard. As far as parallax goes, this is simply the best in class. There isn't a better optic on planet Earth that has better parallax than this. Now, this has to do in large part to the reticle design itself and the laser emitter that's shot into a diffuser that then projects itself on screen. This idea was more or less taken from fighter jet HUDs because L3 is involved in things like that, and they just kind of noticed, well, with their night vision on, you don't have any of the blooming issues that you have to deal with in LED emitted systems, which causes significant problems for people in that space. So why not just downscale this to a rifle optic, and frankly, there you go. The emitter itself, with a little bit of the electronics protection stuff that goes on with that, has to do mostly with its excellent parallax. So a lot of times people hear this and they say, okay, well, how bad could it be? Well, frankly, it can be really bad if you actually look at certain studies that were conducted, for instance, by Green Eye Tactical, that took a look at modern optics and measured them all together at distances like 25, 50, and 100 yards. Now, at 25, you expect greater parallax and that sort of thing. But with EOTECH, as a for instance, we're looking at a 1.5 to 2.5 minute shift at 25. I forget exactly the numbers. That sounds significant, because it is. But the issue with that is that if you went to, for instance, the Trigicon MRO, which had a staggeringly bad, like 15-minute shift at that distance, or the Aimpoint T1 in that particular case, which had like an 11-minute shift, and then the T2, which was significantly better, that ended up with a 2.5 to 3 minute across the board, meaning at all of these distances. This can be quite big as far as your shift at these particular distances. Now, at 25 is like a 2.5 or a 3 minute shift really that big of a deal? No, it's not. But then when you back up to 100 yards, where the shift is barely discernible, meaning basically zero for the EOTECH, and still at like a 2 to 2.5 for the Aimpoint T2, while this isn't that big of a deal, you still have a distance of about this far as the overall shift is concerned. That's significant if you're trying to take a low probability shot at that distance, because you have a dude at 100 and all he has exposed is this and a rifle attached to his face. A 2.5 inch difference on a low probability shot like that versus essentially zero, because you're in a goofy position perception, because you're not trying to expose a whole lot and still take this shot, is enough to where the perception of the person that is using it is affected quite a bit by this. Like, for instance, there are quite a few times that I've taken shots at the standing at 50 yards, right? And I'm trying to move a little bit faster because I have 10 rounds to fire, as a for instance. And based off of the enormous amount of experience that I have with regular LED red dots, based off of my perception on that target, I feel many inches off. I'm trying to hit A zone on a USPSA piece of cardboard, but based off of my perception of events, man, this feels a long way off, and I shouldn't have placed that shot in the first place. But with an EOTECH in my hands, generally speaking, you get away with that. It feels like you got lucky, right? In that it's still A zoned, or instead of it being completely off the target, we're in C. It just turns itself into little perspectives like that. Or, you know, just based off of certain perceptions that you have, the gun is suddenly more accurate, when in reality all you're dealing with is very, very little parallax shift. And that is because the EOTECH in and of itself is best in class. This is everything to do, again, with that emitter. Now, that said, those are essentially like the biggest things to me. But there are a lot of other reasons why this optic is used, and used a lot in the first place. And this digs into everything that has to do with like the minutia of things. Like, if while I'm explaining this, it seems like a lot as far as my explanation to you, there's nothing really wrong with that. What that just really means is, well, you're not really on the road to take advantage of that as much as you would if you had the experience to take advantage of tiny minutia things. The same as like gym stuff, right? Where people start talking about very, very in-depth, detail-oriented things. And some people can really, really take advantage of those little things and create big things out of them. And some people just need to have like solid technique, right? It's the same concept. And this isn't a dig at anybody, honestly. This is just frankly the truth. Today's video is sponsored by the Sonoran Desert Institute. Have you ever thought about making a living in the firearms industry? If you enjoy gun repair, ballistics, learning about firearms, the Sonoran Desert Institute might just be a good fit for you. To find out more about SDI, visit sdi.edu. Use the link in the description down below, or call 480-999-4767 today. And now back to the video. The reticle in and of itself, the standard donut of death, is a lot. It's a lot at once because it gives you far more than people realize. It's not just a donut of death. What this is that the ring is sized a particular way on purpose. So in the center, you have a 1 minute dot. At the 6 o'clock tick, you have essentially the close range holdover, provided you don't have a really tall mount. But that's the close range holdover around about to 10-ish yards. You start losing its effectiveness at 12 plus. But the cool part is that the relation between the center of that dot and the 6 o'clock tick in that ring, you can actually tell the difference between the two if you've gathered enough information to shoot that close. And then as you start to back up, you can tell how that shifts and how that shrinks in relation to your reticle. So you always have a really good reference as far as pulling that data, provided that you've collected that data and visually seen where the impact is at various distances in relation to your zero. Never mind the fact that the 3 and 9 o'clock guys are basically the hold that you would need for a vehicle traveling about 30-35 miles per hour, which is the fastest speed that most vehicles can get up to in an instant almost from still. So for instance, if you're of the type that has this kind of job where you have to worry about squirters coming out of a target area or coming into a target area, generally speaking, around about 35 miles an hour is a pretty good hold. That gives you a colossal amount of information if you start replaying the scenarios over and over. Never mind the fact that you can extrapolate certain things to where if a target's in a dead sprint, you have that reference to use if you're at certain distances, and you can pull a lot of data from that. Also, aerial weapon shooting, if you have to put a target in lag, which is really hard to take a consistent guess at with just a regular LED dot, it's pretty easy to not just monitor your angle, but to monitor your speed and what type of lag you need to put that target into with a reticle like this, because it gives you a lot of exterior references to what it is that you're trying to use. So now you can see why guys in like Coast Guard units that are trying again to destroy boat engines with Barrett M107s or 308 type rifles or whatever end up using these optics quite a bit, which is why there's a 50 BMG reticle in general. So you can tell that there's a lot of utility in an optic like this. And notice how I haven't even gotten into vision yet. Now, Again, as far as vision is concerned, because of the laser emitter, this is simply best in class because of also the compounding feature of very, very minimal parallax, which just helps you out as far as light transmission, what you perceive as far as the reticle is concerned. And then also, we have to understand that vision settings on just about any optic is sort of a misnomer. The vision setting is just the optic turned to low. That's all that really is. So with this particular optic having a vision button, all that really is a hotkey to your lower setting. I've heard it spoken of before to where this is sort of a disadvantage because if the optic turns off, it has memory for where you set it for the low light or day settings, but it doesn't have memory for the vision settings, and then if you press it, it's already set to extremely low, and that can cause a few issues as far as different light conditions and that sort of thing. Generally speaking, I disagree with this vehemently in that most of the time, if you are passive shooting in the first place, you're outside, it's pretty dark. That's why you need vision in the first place. And to have a reticle that cleanly projects itself, meaning it's not just a dot that if you turn really low, you can lose under flash, which you could get quite a bit of if you have an illuminator on to help with target presentation, or even with suppressors, you can get a ton of flash or little sparks shooting at the front end of your gun. And if you're not suppressor equipped and you have a flash suppressor out front only, you get a bunch of sparks. Yeah, I get it. Setting a regular T2 or something like that to low can lose that in those sparks, or it could be a little bit harder to discern. You might want to up the brightness just a little bit, especially in areas that have tons of light pollution, where you have like street lights, interior lights that you can see through the vision, that sort of thing. But the size of the ring on this reticle automatically being set to low and then having the center dot in the middle of it really does help you out because again, you have these references. And again, defaulting to low rather than defaulting to high, especially with an optic that has 30 brightness adjustments to it, is going to help you quite a bit because you can see it overall. And also, it does have memory so long as the optic is kept on. For instance, you have your regular daylight or low light settings, and then you switch over to the vision portion, and then you set it exactly where you want it for your particular environment, which requires a little bit of foresight as far as what you're doing. If you click back and forth between the two, it will maintain that memory so long as the optic is on, which will last for as long as whatever it is that you're doing, because simply pressing the up button once will set you to a 8-hour shutoff timer, which is gonna last as long as what it is that you're doing. And in addition, the opposite of this, pressing down will set you to a 4-hour. So simply doing the down up method where you press down once, press up once, will set you to 8 hours, making sure that your brightness doesn't go anywhere. And now there is nothing that you could do tonight that is going to change that, so you have memory of what it is that you more or less need. And of course, when the lighting does change, you can set this to whatever it is that you need because you have that really fine adjustment to what it is that you're doing, because this is a reticle that's designed to be very sensitive to all of those environmental changes. Small thing too, because it's laser emitted and because the reticle that shoots out is fuzzy, you don't have as much bloom from reticles like this, which really helps out a lot of guys that have astigmatisms. Some guys it doesn't because it's really bad, but it's going to help out a lot of folks because they're not staring into what essentially looks like the sun. So, and here's the other thing that a lot of people really don't talk about also with regards to this, because they'll be like, I'll just set it to one setting and leave it at one setting, or I can just crank between one and the other. This isn't that much of a big deal. I don't understand why there's a button here in the first place. Well, frankly, and just being truthful here, without the intention of knocking on anybody, this just sort of speaks to the experience of guys that have used a lot of vision in the past. Guys that go from outside to inside a lot, generally speaking, deal with the simple fact that when you go inside of buildings, they turn the lights on. So having to switch between a passive setting for outside shooting, just in case these dudes do have vision, and then going inside with lights on means that I'd rather not just have to deal with auto gating and then my other eye trying to take over the fact that, hey, I can see good, means that you're just flipping the things up and using white lights in these buildings. So now it probably helps that I can just hotkey between the NV setting, air quotes, and my regular low light settings in conjunction with a flashlight. This matters a lot. Having that flexibility, again, digging into the minutia here, makes things significantly easier because now if I'm getting ready to come out and I'm getting ready to drop the owl vision again, I can simply press a button and I'm set for outside. There's a lot that goes on here. In addition to this, again, more minutia. Look, it's not hard to use an Aimpoint T2 or an Aimpoint Comp M4 in conjunction with a magnifier. However, a mild issue that you deal with when you use magnifiers in conjunction with LED emitted optics, when your perception is closer to that source, the larger that source actually gets, or rather, the larger that reflection gets. Meaning, if you have a 2-minute dot that's set to a particular brightness, if you flip that magnifier over, it looks much larger than it actually is. And now you're starting to see sunbursting and all this other stuff because you're dragging your eyeball closer to an LED light, if that makes sense. With the laser emitted stuff, and this is provided that you don't over brighten your reticle in the first place, which you shouldn't do, when you throw a magnifier behind it and then throw the lever over, the laser emitter, with perception to how your eyes pick up the image that's in front of your eyes, does not increase the overall size of the 1-minute dot, which makes that significantly more flexible and more reliable in terms of your ability to use that with magnification behind it. Now look, my eyes are already pretty good, like pretty good. Like I have 20/10 vision, they're pretty light sensitive in that I can dim my stuff way down to where I don't really have to worry about sunbursting ever. It's low enough for me to see well, and I don't have to worry about the over brightness causing enlargement or artificial enlargement issues. In addition to the fact that, again, if I throw that magnifier over, I can see very well. So the low probability shot that wasn't a big deal for me at 300 is now a joke at 300. Suddenly makes things significantly more sensible when I have to talk about things like the ballistic reticle version of this optic. Now, that exists, and for some, again, on its face, you look at it, and for some, that's really, really busy, until you start thinking about the multi-role aspect that this could carry. And again, because you're not dealing with artificial dot enlargement, I don't have to sit there and mess with brightness settings the second that I flip this guy over, and I still have very, very minimal parallax to basically 0 at 100, which means that what I can see is accurate, even if it's a little bit too bright for my eyes in that particular moment, which generally speaking it isn't, because it's low enough for me to see well and the dots don't enlarge when I throw the magnification over. So now I have an optic that can do all of these things really well. And touching on the vision stuff again, this is literally the cleanest you're ever going to get as far as a laser emitted thing is concerned, because there is just no way for an LED emitted dot to be as clean or as little sunbursty as a laser emitter shooting into a diffuser is. There just isn't better technology that is out there, and this was more or less figured out in the 70s with fighter jet HUDs that were illuminated in this way, and we're possibly going back even further than that. Like, this is stuff that's been figured out forever ago. So now we have to talk about things like controls and what that means to you. Now, as far as the controls go, as previously stated, further away from you is dimmer and closer to you is brighter. So as far as keeping the battery on, as far as how long what it is that you're doing is going to be, closer, press 1, right, and you have a 8-hour shut off. Press it once on the lower or the dimmer, and now you have 4 hour. So typically speaking, if what I'm doing is going to last all day, when I take a moment to stop and do what it is that I need to do, simply pressing down 1 and then up 1 makes sure that my brightness goes nowhere and I have 8 hours before the thing just shuts off. In addition to that, as far as feeling for stuff with gloves on, the second you go up in the fencing and you feel a recessed circle, that's where your NV options are. So I don't have to sit here and play with this if I have foreknowledge of what this feels like. Never mind the fact that the individual brightness settings are, well, a lot. There's something like 30 of them, so you can get really finely oriented onto what exactly you need for those circumstances if you're playing that kind of role, or if you have wild differences in brightness on the day, which absolutely does happen, because you can have no cloud cover, really concentrated sun that suddenly gets really cloudy, and now you have to deal with that. Or the various brightness shifts between sun still up and it's starting to set, and then it sinks behind the trees, and we're not quite all the way dark yet, but it's definitely beyond what would be considered bright outside, and we're starting to transition over into the dark. You have the brightness settings that can keep up with that you can regularly check to make sure that you can see what you're supposed to see. In reality, this thing is quite flexible, and it handles an array of mission sets that just most optics just don't, or don't do very well, even if you try to shoehorn them into it, which certainly you can under certain sets of circumstances. Anybody that has a preference for a particular optic can make it do certain things. This one can simply do all of those things. Now, there are a couple of cons to this, and this mainly, again, has to do with the power requirements that an optic like this simply has, that you can't really get around, because all of its functionality sort of bakes in greater power requirements. The auto shutoff frankly makes or breaks some decision making. Even though there are plenty of workarounds to certain things, there are a couple of things that are just straight up cons with the optic. Number one, there's a lot of people that don't like optics like this for home defense. And I totally get that, right? Because your overall attention is what's going on in the house versus wanting to drag up an optic, press a button, make sure it's on, and then do what you gotta do. I certainly understand that for sure. There's also a lot of cops that I know that legitimately train rather than act like they do, that say things like, well, in something like my patrol car, if I have to react to a shooting like right now, first of all, I'm already in a really bad position because it's a really solid chance I'm getting shot in my car if this is already happening. So that's just a non-starter. And if I somehow get away from being shot in my car, the last thing I want to do is to press a button. Okay, got it. But if it isn't that extreme, if I have to respond right now, grab the rifle, get out of the car, and do what I gotta do, again, I have too much stuff to do out here that has nothing to do with the shooting part. I really don't want to have to bake in now having to press a button for it. So anything that requires that speed of response time is not really a niche in which this thing can do well, because you have to dedicate enough software to press a button. That frankly transcends a little bit of the training issue quote that you could have, which makes sense. It does, because even if you're trained really well, guys make mistakes sometimes, man. So I understand that for sure. And under those circumstances, I actually concur. I would rather just have an optic that's on, that I keep on, even if I set it to daylight, threw it in the car, and now it's dark, and I'm set to daylight. At least you have a big reference onto what it is that you're trying to shoot at, and then you can turn it down later. The thing is on to start, right? So that makes sense. It makes a bunch of sense. Another thing too is like general infantry use. So here's the thing. It doesn't show up on the IR spectrum, which thankfully that is the case. Otherwise, it would just delete its effectiveness in this realm for about ever. But when you have this optic set to low light settings, meaning in conjunction with your flashlight, for one reason or another, if it's dark outside, you actually see the laser emitter shooting into the diffuser at night. So in other words, it shows a little red hue that you can actually see. Now that's an issue for anybody that has eyes, because if you're trying to stay hidden in a position, if you're trying to guard something really well, and somebody with the naked eye is trying to look through a particular area, this is just one of those little things that can give you up as far as positions are concerned, and that's something I'd just rather not have happen. So I understand that for sure. Never mind the fact that, well, just frankly, if your mission set is literally all day, every day, where you're an engineer that has all of your engineer things to do, or if you're an infantryman that has all of your infantryman things to do, can you work around pressing down then up on a button every once in a while when you have a chance to stop because you're not in constant movement for 8 hours straight? Okay, sure, I got that. It can be worked around, but for some, that's an issue. They would rather just have something like an Aimpoint T2 or Comp M4, take a little bit of the knocking capability, and then just do what they gotta do. That makes a lot of sense to me. And in roles that require the tightest, lightest possible rifle that you could possibly have, for instance, anything that's getting folded up and put into a bag, I'd rather not. I'd rather have an optic that is a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, and that can just stay on all the time. These are things that are very specific, but they matter in the decision-making process, simply because they are part of the decision-making process. Other than that, how would I categorize the EXPS3? Well, I would categorize it as for someone that has enough skill set and enough dedicated brain power to take advantage of the minutia when the little stuff actually matters versus you thinking it does. Because some people try to buy themselves into skill, and that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is people that have the skill set to actually take advantage of these little things. Because, for instance, if a 2.5, 3 minute parallax at 100 actually does affect what it is that you're doing, and you have to plan for it, because you could actually shoot that tight at 100, this is for you. This absolutely is for you, because it allows you to collect tons of data and make decisions on the fly that actually affect what it is that you're doing. For instance, if you're the kind of person that thoroughly understands the fact that 416 style upper receivers are raised ever so slightly to the point where you could throw a lower 1/3 optic mount on there and take advantage of the fact that while it isn't as tall, for instance, as a 193 or something similar, it does boost you up just a little bit so that using a lower 1/3 mount adds a little bit of height to bring you a little more upright. And now I can take advantage of not just the reticle, but under vision use, I can understand that I'm boosted up ever so slightly so things are a little more convenient for me. If those are details that matter to you, this is the optic for you. As it stands, or at least at present, having looked at basically everything that is on the market that has to do with this sort of stuff, I cannot find a better offensive reticle on planet Earth. And offensive can mean a great many things for a great many people. But what this turns into for me is that, for instance, yes, home defense is in fact home defense. But if I have my child in the house, I now have to go on offense because I have to get to his room. And anything that's between me and that room is going to get mulched, which means I'm on offense now. So anything that has to do with anything remotely tailoring itself or even tangentially related to offense, this is quite possibly the greatest optic that has ever existed for people that do that. Because not only does it give you a solid optic reticle any time of day under any set of circumstances, what it also gives you is enough little information to give you that little tiny edge that you could have possibly used that under any other circumstance and any other optic would force you to take a guess. And that, ladies and gents, is massively important to not just me, but anybody else that makes this choice, whether or not you're conscious of it. So, that said, guys, if you want to support us through Patreon or our social media outlets, you can absolutely do that. If you want to get more out of it than just supporting us through Patreon, $41 a month can get you as much training as you want, so long as we're not dealing with logistically challenging courses, like for instance a private course or a soft skin vehicle class, which are fairly obvious as to why I don't allow the Patreon guys to take massive advantage of me on that as well. But that said, if you want to take advantage of all that stuff or support us through any of those channels, it would be greatly appreciated. If and only if you like what you saw today, go ahead and give us a like and a subscribe. Hit the little notification bell. It helps us out massively. And remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Easy.